Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway.
Welcome back, guys. Today we are talking about the Tuileries and the outside of the Louvre. And if you've ever visited the Louvre, you know the outside is just as beautiful as the inside. I mean, there's a lot going on out there, lots of statues, lots of architecture. So Claudine's going to give us like a virtual tour of the outside of the Louvre as well as the Tuileries. And I'll let her take it from here.
Yeah, well, last week we talked about where you work all day at the Trocadero. And this week we talk about my favorite place and where I'm always working, whether I'm researching on my own or taking people. And that is the Louvre, my favorite place in the world. So most people don't know this, but the Jardin des Tuileries and the Louvre are the same. The Louvre actually oversees the garden. And so when you walk through there, that is why it is just so perfectly kept. I mean, most French gardens are, but that's why you have these amazing statues and everything that you could find also in the Louvre. So they actually oversee both of them, which is
I had no idea they were in charge
of. They are. And
the Palais.
That's why you could usually see, sometimes they have you see people walking around and they have their jackets says Louvre. And so, give me one of those.
I know, you should just buy one. Can we get one of those off Amazon?
I know. They had it's almost like, police crime tape, but it said the Louvre on it. And I was like, I need some of that. But we'll start up at one of my favorite little parts, and that is up in the corner, and it's in the northwest corner of it, which is also a pretty fantastic spot to catch the sunset, because you get to see, standing up there, you get to see the Eiffel Tower, the obelisk, all the way over to, all the way down the river, the Arc de Triomphe, everything. So it's kind of this amazing, almost, hidden spot that you could see the sunset in every night. Last week, we talked about seeing the sunrise at the Trocadero. This is a great place to see it actually set. But up there in the upper corner is where the Jeu de Paume is. And the Jeu de Paume was built in 1861 by Lucien Virot. It was built as a tennis court for the emperor. So Jeu de Paume is basically, it's a form of what we think of as tennis today. So you will hear there's a Jeu de Paume there. There's a Jeu de Paume at Versailles. That is why, because it was these big spaces that they kind of had what was almost like an indoor tennis court. In 1878, it was enlarged, and in 1909, it was opened as a museum. It was basically when the Musée de Luxembourg was running out of space, they decided to use the Jeu de Paume, and it was an extension of the Louvre for a short period of time. In 1922, it began to be the place that they did foreign exhibitions that would be traveling. They'd come through and just put these exhibitions there. Now, a lot of these exhibitions, of course, they have in the Louvre. But there has been talk by the powers that be of maybe someday moving the Madame of the Louvre, Mona Lisa, maybe moving her out. And maybe they should build something in the Tuileries, kind of like the Jeu de Paume, shove her in there.
I mean, I've been saying that for years.
It would be amazing, because then it'd be like you could have the Louvre back, because they say that 85% of people that come to the Louvre only come to see the Mona Lisa and then they leave. So it's like, good, put them out there.
I wonder if they don't do it, though, because they'd lose so much money.
I don't know. I mean, I think if you had the same ticket, they'd probably have the same ticket. So, because that'd be pretty smart, 17 euros to get in there to go see her, and then maybe you could go to the other one. But I think it just would be, good for the traffic flow. I mean, the Louvre in and of itself is so much more than the Mona Lisa. And a lot of people, when I take people there, I say, what do you want to see? And a lot of times it's like the Mona Lisa, Winged Victory, and Venus Milo, which we did that podcast episode in, I think, 2020 about the three ladies of the Louvre. And those are the three biggest pieces that people want to go and see. So I think they would still want to go there, I hope. But maybe it would just, it's just the issue with Mona Lisa is it just the chaos that surrounds her.
Yeah, I like that, the chaos.
Yeah, because it's I would say it's the only painting you could hear, because you're getting close, because just the volume level of talking goes up.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, but the Jeu de Paume from 1940 to 1944, it's one of its biggest eras of its history. The Nazis took it over as a depot for stolen art. And the one woman that was there is, as you know, my favorite woman in history, Rose Valland. She was there. She was asked to stay there by Jacques Chouchard, and we did a whole podcast episode about her that we'll link in the show notes. But she was asked by Jacques Chouchard, who was in charge of the National Museums of France. He said, why don't you stay there and keep an eye on things, because she spoke German. She was almost caught a couple times, but she was so quiet and mousy that they didn't know what she was doing. But she'd go home every night, and fill these journals up, because she had this amazing mind that she could remember everything she saw and heard, and she would fill these journals with the info of the paintings that were stolen. And some 60,000 pieces were returned to families because of Rose Valland. And she's just the greatest.
We love her. For president.
I know. Well, there needs to be a statue of her in the Jeu de Paume. I got to find out who to talk to about that. But there was they ended up, Hitler decided that there was a lot of art that he considered degenerate. So you're like the Cubist, a lot of the modern art of the time, some Van Gogh, Picasso's Cubist period, some of those, and of course Jewish painters, he thought was degenerate. And so there was one night there in the Tuileries that there was a giant pile of these paintings that include Picasso's and Van Gogh and and Modigliani, and they set fire to it, and Rose Valland watched it.
Yikes.
It just, the thought of it makes me just cringe. I just can't even imagine. It's just, and also thinking like, what was in that pile? Ugh. But
so sad.
After Hitler, one of the horrible Nazis was Hermann Goering. He visited more than 24 times and then he would go there, and they would set up the Jeu de Paume almost kind of just like it was a gallery, and they'd be they'd go and steal these things from Jewish families and Jewish galleries and bring it in there and kind of set it all up. And he'd come in and almost be shopping, like, I'll take this one and that one. He also would collect some of it that he knew that Hitler wanted, but then he'd have stuff that he wanted to keep. And he actually, some of the degenerate art that he actually liked, so he actually would keep some of it. But if you ever see that movie Monuments Men with George Clooney, which is an adaptation of the actual book about the Monuments Men, which definitely read that. But it has a scene where Cate Blanchett is kind of very, very loosely, I'll say, based on Rose Valland, and she spits in his champagne glass. Which, good for her. But from 1947 to 1986, it was where all the Impressionist paintings were before the Orsay opened in 1986.
It's such a small space. I can't imagine that.
It is. And now today it's like kind of like the contemporary photo museum. They do some really cool special exhibits. They don't have a permanent collection. It's always special exhibits. I went one time just because I'm so obsessed with Rose Valland that I wanted to be inside the building. And it's just like, it's pretty boring inside as far as like, you're not seeing any vast, gorgeous ceilings and columns. Everything's like white. But it was, just to be inside that building where she was pretty cool. And there is a plaque on the side of the building dedicated to her. Not enough for Rose Valland.
No, we need way more Rose.
Yeah, more Rose. So when you walked outside, that upper part is the Esplanade Fouillon. It runs along the Rue de Rivoli. It was all laid out by a gentleman named Alexandre Lenotre. Lenotre is also the one that did Vaux-le-Vicomte, and that's when Louis XIV saw him and stole him and brought him over to do design Versailles. He laid out a lot of the Tuileries. There is a bust of him kind of down below, right when you walk in, below where we are. There's a bust of him and has a little thing about Lenotre. But the garden itself is filled with tons of different statues. And most of the statues that are there are now copies. It was mostly in the late 70s, early 80s that they took out the originals, many of which came from the Chateau de Marly and also from Versailles. And they were just getting ruined out in the elements. So they had copies made. And so what you see today are the copies. So many of the originals are now in the Louvre. When my grandparents first went in 72 and 77, there's photos of the original ones. And there was, the layout was a little different too, because they didn't have the road that goes through between the Louvre and the Tuileries. And so there was one statue my grandpa took a picture of, and then it took me quite a long time to find that statue inside the Louvre. And there's not a copy of that one now in the garden. But when you're standing at that at that entrance, it looks over towards the Place de la Concorde and the obelisk. There's the horseshoe, the Fer de Cheval. And at the base of that is a statue Le Tibert. It was originally the Chateau de Marly, and it was added to the Tuileries in 1719. And then there is also a smaller version of it in the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, but then there is the larger one that Napoleon had originally stolen from Italy on July 27, 1796. After the Treaty of Tolentino in 1797, it was allowed to stay along with the Wedding Feast of Cana. It also remains. Most of that looted art that he had taken after he lost at Waterloo, all these countries were like, hey, give us our stuff back. So a lot of it was in a treaty. It was decided on what could stay. The Pope even intervened and said they could keep France could keep this. We want this back, or we'll trade you for this. Down at the bottom is that right there, the Tibert looks at the basin. And around the basin are quite a few different statues. There's Le Silence by Pierre II, Le Gros. And then also the ones I really love are the ones of the season. So there is L'été, which summer, by Guillaume Cousteau, and Hiver by Ménac-Corot. Those were all done in the 1700s. And then Hannibal is also there. But you also have good old Caesar standing there checking everything out. This part of the Tuileries was all created in 1687. It was originally, that is where they had the Tuileries, the Palais de Tuileries, which was created under Catherine de Medici, of course, who is another woman we've talked about before, who was quite the interesting woman. And there's going to be a new TV series on, I think it's like the Stars Network or something. And it's something like the Queen's Serpent or something. I mean, basically they're getting it right that she was kind of a nasty woman. So I'm really interested to see how that is, even though I have a really hard time watching some of those historical things, especially when it'll be like, that didn't happen.
It's all made up.
But I'm kind of interested to see what it is. I think it comes out in September or so. At the very center of the garden, the Allée Centrale, is a part of the access, and we'll tell you about the access when you get closer to the Louvre. On either side, on one side of it is the Grand Couvert, and it's dotted with a few pieces of contemporary art, some ponds, and there's even some cafes there. So if you go through, it's a great place. I take people on walking tours, and sometimes we stop there for a glass of wine or a coffee on a sunny day. It's really nice. You have a lot of shade, so if it's really hot, it's a great place to kind of get a little break from the direct sun. The Tuileries itself, the name comes from the tile factory that once was there. I have tried to find out what the name of that tile factory was, and I have not been able to find out anything. And we're talking about, like 16th century was this tile factory. In 1985, during excavations, they found pieces of the tile, which you could see in the Louvre today. Francois Premier first bought the land to build a home for his mother, Louis de Savoie. After the death of Henry II is when Miss Catherine de Medici wanted to leave where they were living, where he was injured, the Hotel des Tournelles, which was over kind of where Place des Vosges now. She commissioned to have this done in 1564, and it was just outside the wall of Charles V. And when you go down in through the bottom to get to the Louvre through the carousel entrance, you can see part of the remains of that lower part of the Charles V wall. She loved all of her Italian, and because she was from Florence, and she loved all of her Italian designers. So Bernard de Carsacchi created this Florentine garden with fountains and grottos and mazes. So that was a precursor to what we see today. The grotto itself was decorated with frogs and other natural elements that were done by the artist Bernard Passy. And you could see some of those frogs. They found them when they did the digging in 1985. And it's like, how cool is that? They're basically are 400 years old.
That's super cool.
It's so cool. Bernard Passy he did this amazing pottery that like these huge platters, and they would all be like, bas relief kind, where they'd have like, snakes and fish and stuff, but it would be like, 3-dimensional. So it's not like you could put a roast on this platter and cut it. It was more like you just propped up the platter and looked at it, but it's really cool. And you can see some of his pieces in the Louvre as well. There's a statue of him in Saint-Germain. But after Catherine de Medici, she left the Tuileries as she was having it built, because she was told, and this is kind of one of my favorite stories about her, that towards the end of her life, she was very close with Nostradamus, and then she had other advisors, seers as they were called, and one of them told her that she would die near Saint-Germain. And so very close on the other side of the Louvre is the Church of the Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. And so she thought, heck, I'm out of here. Like, I can't be this close to Saint-Germain. So she up and left the Tuileries before it was finished. She went back over to her palace that she had, basically where Les Halles is now. And she was there. And then months later, she started getting really sick. And a doctor came to see her. And it ended up being like 2 days before she died. And the doctor was taking care of her. And she asked what his name was. And his name was like, Francois Saint-Germain. His middle name was Saint-Germain. So
that's the best story ever.
She died near Saint-Germain. But in 1594, Henry IV returned to Paris and began to work on his grand design that involved redoing the gardens that had basically completely fallen into disrepair. He updated it, covering it with pavilions to walk under. In 1627, the Tuileries was given to Madame Legrand, who was the daughter of Gaston d'Orléans of France, and who ended up being one of they call the richest princess in Europe. She made the gardens even larger, closer to what today's footprint is. And under Louis XIV, they opened the park to just the respectable people could only go in there. The Grand Carré, from the stairs at the edge of the trees, is the former area reserved for the palace inhabitants. Le Notre laid out the basin and the statues, each in a very deliberate way. At the end of the basin, Misery by Jean-Baptiste Hughes was done in 1907, reflecting the emotions of the Queen when she had lived there. And there's also one of Cain having just killed his brother that was done in 1896 by Henry Vidal. There's some really amazing ones that are, especially at the basin that's closer to the Louvre. Also in the basin, you sometimes will find, I have walked through there a million times, and maybe you've seen them more, but the boats that they also you could rent in the Jardin de Luxembourg, they also have them there. I've only seen them a couple times.
Yeah, they are there, but it's random. Yeah, you're right. It's very random.
Yeah.
I do see them quite often.
Yeah, I mean, the Luxembourg, it's like, they're always there unless it's like winter time.
Yeah.
But it's just that, and it's the Palais des Tuileries. Was this beautiful, palace that was there that connected either end of the Louvre. When you see the Louvre now, it's this huge U shape, but at the time they put it there at the end. And the Louvre was not connected to it, the Palais du Louvre. And so then eventually they ended up, when we get closer, we'll tell you how they connected it. But it was destroyed during the Commune on May 23rd, 1871. The communers set fire to the palace. They threw in buckets of oil that they lit on fire. It burned for 2 days. The blackened walls that were destroyed stood for 12 years before they finally took it down in 1883, which is crazy. They still talk about someday rebuilding it, which would be amazing.
That would be really cool. I can't imagine they do it because everyone loves the Tuileries,
Yeah,
but that would be cool.
Billions of dollars.
Yeah, and aren't we already lending them money to like fix their stuff?
Yeah, I think so.
They don't have the money for that.
Raise the price, make it 25 years to go visit the Mona Lisa.
Just the Mona Lisa.
But you can find the remains in the garden, off to the side, kind of off. Like the first time I went there, I didn't know this was there. I didn't know as much about the Palais de Tuileries, of course, back then. And then when I did find out about it, the next time I was like, I got to go and find that. And it's kind of off, and it's been rebuilt, so it's not like the actual piece from the Tuileries, but you could kind of see part of the Tuileries. There are also, last week when we talked about the Trocadero, there is a piece of the actual original piece of the Tuileries there in the Trocadero, and it even still has the burn marks on it, which is just pretty cool. In 1889, the garden itself was extended all the way to the carousel. And so the carousel, you will see, the hedges that are there were planted in 1995. Even if you go to like Google Earth and look down on the Louvre and the Tuileries, you will see that they kind of radiate out like the rays of a sun. And that is because it was originally a sundial. The hedges that were planted in 1995 are scattered throughout it are the 18 statues by Aristide Maillot. They were added in 1964. There was just recently, I think it's only for a few more days at the Musée d'Orsay, a fantastic exhibition dedicated to Aristide Maillot. And then, of course, there's his museum that's in the 7th. It's more about special exhibits. It does not have a whole lot about himself. There's like a couple little rooms, but the statues are really great. The carousel itself gets its name from Louis XIV. And a lot of people don't know this, and I always love sharing this on my Instagram. On June 5th, 1662, Louis XIV had a huge party there because he heard his wife was finally pregnant. The large party included a very immense group of horses and riders that played a game, looping their lances through these hoops and tossing a ball back and forth. So they'd have these huge, poles that had ribbons hanging down with these little rings, and they would go through with the lance and they'd catch it. And so if they caught the little ring, it was, you were a winner. So this is the original. That is what a carousel used to be. So it actually was this game. The name ended up becoming, we know it now as a carousel as like the carousel horses or merry-go-round. Carousels were originally intended for adults. Because
What?
they would actually have these little rings that hung down. And so you'd get on a carousel and ride around it. And the adults would be on there, and it was a game, and they'd have these lances. And as they went by, they'd have to catch these rings as the merry-go went around. And then over time, it ended up turning into this thing. They got rid of the rings. You just have the horses on there. And now it's just a thing for kids.
I think we need to bring it back. Bring it back.
I did actually ride on one in the Tuileries. I think it was on my birthday a few years ago, and a good friend of mine was in Paris with me, and we walked by, and I was like, let's do it. And there was nobody else on it.
Let's do it.
But it is
that one of the empty usually.
Yeah.
Not many people on
And
there.
in the Jardin de Luxembourg is one of the original carousels that still remains, of course, and it was done by Charles Garnier, who did the beautiful Opera House. And so you think that it's going to be this over the top amazing thing like the Opera House. It's not.
Yeah, it's not the same at all.
But it is pretty cool that it is one of the oldest ones. In 1806, Napoleon wanted an ark built to commemorate his many victories. During the Terror, it was a site of the guillotine before it moved to the Place de la Concorde. It was designed by Charles Percier and Pierre Fontaine, that dedicated the Arc de Triomphe and is to the de Carousel to the victory of Austerlitz. It's a smaller copy of the Arch of Constantine in Rome. There's bas reliefs around the top that depict many of the battles that were all picked by Vivien Denon, whose name is tied to the Louvre as well. And it was created by Charles Menier. At the very top, Napoleon used some of his looted bounty from Italy, the horses of St. Mark that he took from Venice. He had taken those and brought them back and put them on the top. Again, after he lost power, they wanted them back, but not before they made copies. So the ones you see up there are copies of the originals, and then they added the allegory of restoration, leads the horses off towards battle, and those were added by Louis XVIII. But it's still pretty cool. I mean, that arc, it's so much smaller than the Arc de Triomphe. But it's of the two arcs that Napoleon wanted built, this is the only one that he saw finished.
I mean, I like it because it's like the secret entrance to the Louvre over there. I always tell my clients, go over there, go to the hole in the ground.
Yeah, you could go down there. Just recently, they reopened it for you to be able to enter the Louvre through there. They had it closed off just until a few months ago. But there's been times that you go down there and then they just say no. And then it's like, oh my God, you have to walk all the way back outside.
You really never know how they're going to respond.
You never know.
So you hope for the best.
But go down there because you see the lower remains of the wall of Charles V, but you also see some of the statues that were saved from the Palais de Tuileries that are there. And so it's just right there, and they don't really have a lot of markings to know what it is, but it is still pretty cool to go see.
Definitely.
When you are standing there at the carousel, look towards the beautiful Louvre. When you're looking at it with your back to the carousel, on the left side is the Richelieu wing. Most of that was created. It was started under Napoleon Bonaparte, which is the part that's kind of there off of the Cour Napoleon is the courtyard where the actual pyramid is. And that was done by Napoleon, but the part that extends out from that was all done by Napoleon III. And that at one point was all completely open. There was no building there. Percier and Fontaine mirrored the other side of it that was done under Henry IV of the Grand Gallery. So they just copied what they had already done there. So that's why it looks, it just is all pleasing to your eye. On the right is the Denon wing. And that is, of course, where all of the things that everybody wants to go see. Henry IV was the one who wanted to connect the Louvre to the Tuileries. So that is why the Grand Gallery was built, to go all the way to the end of the Tuileries. When we say that there's nothing left of the Tuileries, that's not exactly true, because when you look at the very far ends of the Louvre, the Pavillon de Flore, which is on the Seine side, and the Pavillon Marsan, that's on the Rue de Rivoli, those were technically the Tuileries.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so the Louvre matched up to it, and then when everything, they had it rebuilt. Napoleon III had a lot of it rebuilt, the parts that were damaged. On the right, when you look over towards the Seine side, Napoleon III opened up the gateway so that cars could go through there. The Grand Guichets were lifted. They basically took apart the Grand Gallery, lifted it up, and put these huge archways so now the cars and mostly giant buses go through. It's the Pavillon Lédégère, and then also the Pavillon Très Moyen. It was goes up, in the Pavillon Rohan is there on the north side, and that is where you see the Grand Gallery. So when you're walking through the Grand Gallery and you feel like you're just walking forever and ever and ever, that's where you are. It's right above that.
Oh, I had no idea. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And then if you look up above those, so you look over towards the Seine, where those gateways are, and you look up, and there's kind of these little towers that stick up. Look really closely to the one that's on the left, because they have these gold stars on it with the letter N for Napoleon. When you see the N anywhere on the Louvre, it's not Napoleon Bonaparte, it's Napoleon III, but it was Napoleon III's way of also saying, like, hey, this is for my uncle too. But there's N's up there. But if you look closely at them, the N's are backwards. So to this day, they don't know why. And even like the very famous, like Stéphane Bern and all these like very famous French historians Nobody's ever been able to find the reason why. But the ends were put on backwards. And so they were like, was it somebody that was disgruntled? Or maybe it was, this is a long time ago. This was done in, the 19th century. So it's not like now where it was a 3D printer got it backwards.
3D printer.
But it's pretty cool because all the other ones on either the Denon and the Richelieu side, they're all going the correct way.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's very strange. But so now we head over to the Cour Napoleon, and then there is a statue, as what you like to call it, the statue of the horse. Is the statue of Louis XIV, and it's by Lorenzo Bernini, the very famous Italian artist. He was brought over to France to design the facade of the Louvre by Louis XIV and some statues. And he actually did design something that was going to be put onto the facade in the backside of the Louvre, but it was never adapted, never brought, because then Louis XIV was like, up, I'm out of here, and headed to Versailles. So Bernini did this equestrian statue of him as a gift and gave it to him, and Louis XIV hated it. He did not like the way that he looked, so Louis XIV put it in the farthest corner of the Garden of Versailles. And the Garden of Versailles is like massive. So, he put it would feel like miles away because he didn't want to see it. But then later, a French sculptor, Francois Giraudon, altered it a bit and changed it so it had the king as almost more of a Roman hero, and Louis XIV liked it a little bit more. But in 1988, during the removal of the Cour Napoleon, it was being completely renovated, and that is when they decided they needed to address the fact of how to get through, these millions of people that were coming to the Louvre every single year. And so the statue was actually brought out by I.M. brought from Versailles, put in the Louvre. But one of the coolest things about it is if you stand behind him and you look straight through the garden, if you look all the way to the end, it's called the Grand Access. And it lines up from Louis XIV. If you stand just on a clear day and just at the right time, you go from Louis XIV through the Arc de Triomphe de Carousel. Then you go right down the center of the Tuileries to the obelisk, straight down the Champs-Élysées, straight underneath the Arc de Triomphe, and then all the way out to the Arc at La Défense. And it's called the Grand Access. And if you want to get a really good view of it, is go inside the Louvre, into the Sully wing, kind of off to the right, and you get there's a lot of the windows there, a lot of times are open. Stand there and you could really see it all the way over through the Arc de Triomphe.
It's a pretty amazing view. I love how they love parallels. I mean, as a photographer, leading lines are key. There are a ton of leading lines in Paris.
Yeah, it's so cool. And they wanted to do a couple of those. They wanted to have one that went from the Opera House, from the Palais Garnier, all the way over to Saint-Germain. But, and that's kind of why they cut through the Louvre as well. But as you know, there's buildings that line up just on the left bank. So that never went through. So he wanted to actually, with Haussmann, Napoleon III wanted to have these other accesses created, but none of them actually happened, sadly. This area, at once the Cour Napoleon, was filled with houses and churches and convents all the way up until the end of the 17th century, when they decided to purchase and kind of evacuate some of these people. It was under Francois Mitterrand that he wanted to add his mark to the Louvre, and he began what he called the Grand Travaux. In 1984, Mitterrand asked I.M. to design a new entrance. Normally, there's always a contest. We've talked about these things before. There's always a contest, and they put it out there and say, submit your design. But Mitterrand didn't want to do that, and he already knew who I.M. was, and so he told I.M. I want to have something created. And so he had I.M. kind of secretly came to Paris and be scouting things out and scouting out the gardens, and came up with this idea. He was a Chinese American, also born on April 26th, like me and Delacroix. He snuck into Paris and he would go through the garden, and he really liked all the very clean lines that are, so synonymous with a French garden and André Le Nôtre. So he used that as inspiration for the pyramid. I take people to the Louvre all the time, and they will say to me, some of them are like, yeah, I just don't like it. And I'm like, and then I kind of tell them a backstory. because they think, why is there a pyramid here? It makes no sense. What does this have to do with it? But there is a backstory. In 1985, when the drawing was unveiled, people hated it. The New York Times even called it a joke. But he wanted to, I.M. Pei wanted to have a sense of weightlessness and reflect the light, but not blocking the view. And when you do stand on it from either side, you could see all the way through it. No matter where you are on the outside, it doesn't block any of the building. He worked to find a specific glass maker to make the very, very clear glass. It has a hint of kind of a taupey gray to it, so it kind of matches the facade. There's 673 low iron glass pieces, not the 666 that some people like to say it is. But the reason it's that there's a pyramid is obviously because he liked these very geometric lines, but it does go back because there's been 2 pyramids there in the past. The first one, they did something a long, long time ago there in the Tuileries garden. And it was just kind of it was a smaller, one of the folies, which is kind of, it's almost like, a set on a stage. But then under Napoleon III, he actually built a huge wooden one there in the Cour Napoleon. And they did it for August 15th they were trying to get August 15th to be known as Saint Napoleon's Day, because that was Napoleon Bonaparte's birthday. But, we don't celebrate that now. It didn't really catch on. But Napoleon III had this huge pyramid built out of wood, and they set fire to it. And also, oh my God. Yeah. And at that time is when they started discovering all these things in Egypt and bringing them back to Europe and bringing these stories and paintings and stuff about Egypt. So it was this huge Egyptology that was going on at that time, during the time of Napoleon III, and even back under Napoleon, his uncle. So it just kind of was this big thing. So it's not completely like out of the norm of there being a pyramid, and also you have the obelisk. Yeah. So sometimes I sometimes sway people to think, oh yeah, okay, it's not that bad.
You got a lot of work ahead of you.
I think it's pretty cool. And what the coolest thing is when you go in there in the morning, have you ever seen it when they're cleaning it?
No, never.
It's really cool. They have this thing that they attach to it, and I could usually hear it because I almost always walk over through the Cour Carré in the back in the morning and go through the Louvre.
Oh, yeah, I think that's next to the glass.
Yeah, and so you can hear this thing, and it's kind of like one of those little Roombas, or is that Roombas? The things that the carpet cleaner, whatever, vacuum, whatever that word is. And it's kind of like that. And it's attached to these hoses because of water. And they just put it on there, and you could hear it just like, and it just slowly goes up and down each side of it. There's always like 12 men standing below it, just watching it, like working.
Poor team.
But it's pretty cool to actually see, because I always wondered, like, how do they keep that clean? I always feel bad for the people working there in security, because on a hot day, I never use that entrance because as a member, you have your own. But it is so incredibly hot because it turns into almost like a magnifying glass on those hot, sunny days. I feel horrible for those people working in there.
And then they have like 2 billion tourists talking to them every day.
Yeah, it's just got to be crazy. But on the north side of it is the Richelieu wing that was named after the Cardinal, of course, Cardinal Richelieu, that was the advisor under Louis XIII and then Louis XIV. He was a huge collector of art. He's the one that had the Palais Royal. It was in here that there's also the apartments of Napoleon III, even though he never stayed there. It's a story for another time. There's statues, the objets d'art are there. And there's also one of my favorites, the Gallery de Medici, which is the 24 paintings done by Rubens. The Denon wing, which is where the big stuff is that everybody goes to, was named for Vivant Denon, who was the first curator of the Musée Napoleon, which is what would turn into the Louvre. And that's, of course, that's where the Mona Lisa is. And in the center is the Sully wing. That's actually the oldest part of the Louvre, of the, contemporary Louvre, we could call it. It was named after Maximilien de Baton de la Duc de Sully. He was a very close friend of Henry IV. And it is the oldest part, as I said, and it's really cool. The second floor is the entire circumference of it is all French paintings. It's one of my favorite places to go, and nobody ever goes there. So it's really, really quiet. In the courtyard, the new Louvre, as it was called, that Napoleon did. He wanted to create basically this palace that would be the envy of all of Europe. And on the facade, he added 86 statues of the great men of France that go all the way around the entire Cour Napoleon. There's everybody from Abelard and Mazarin and Voltaire. Even Lenotre is up there. But they're pretty cool. They've been recently cleaning them, which was kind of fun to watch because they get pretty gross just from all of the cars and everything. The back side of it is the Cour Carrée. That's the original site of the Palais de Louvre. When Francois Premier announced that he was returning to Paris, he said he was going to live in the Louvre, but it was a medieval palace, and it wasn't, a great, image of the most beautiful thing that this country now had. So he was the one who actually had a lot of it torn down and was the one who started building the Louvre that we see today. It was his son, Henry II, that took it over, adding onto it. And then each king after that would add their own little parts. And if you go, especially in the Cour Carrée, you could almost read the history of the Louvre because there's all the different initials. They're not very, it's not, you kind of have to know what you're looking at because some of them will have, like an L and an A. And so that's Louis the 13th and Anne of Austria. And so, but you could kind of see who did what if you keep an eye out for all of the different initials. And if you're in Paris, I would love to take you and I could show you all of them.
I mean, you can just hear that she knows everything, guys.
I do love it.
I
do love
it. She's kind of obsessed, and we're obsessed because she's obsessed.
I do love taking people, and then they tell me I took a gal that they come to Paris all the time, like at least once a year, but they had, and for like 15 years, and they never went to the Louvre. And they thought in the fall, because it was, not as busy this last fall, they thought, well, maybe this is a good time to go. And so I took them to the Louvre. And, when I take people, it's all custom. It's only to what you tell me if there's something specific you want to see or a different, type of the art you want to see. And I customize it. And she had just said the only thing she goes, the one thing I want to see more than anything is a Winged Victory, which is, of course, one of my favorites. And so when she saw it, she almost cried. And then she said that she was like, that was my favorite 3 hours that we had in Paris. And she then became a member. And then I'm going to take her there again in a couple weeks.
As you should. See, guys, you can find a way to love the Louvre if you hang out with Claudine, even if you think it's not for you. She'll help you find a way. And definitely take this episode on the go. Listen to it while you're standing outside or driving to work and imagining you're in Paris. That works too. And check out Claudine's website, ClaudineHemingway.com, guys. And definitely tune in next week.
Thank you for listening to Paris History Avec a Hemingway. If you want to find out some more, you could always find me on my Instagram page, Claudine Bleu Blanc Rouge, and that's BLEU, as in the French way to spell it. And each day I post a daily history lesson about a person or a place or something in Paris, or it's lots of fun facts. And then also at ClaudineHemingway.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter there.